coming. We're going to use the mic.
Yeah. Aaron said you have to press and hold.
I think it's on.
Yeah.
It's a small group, but we're going to use the microphone for the sake of the recording, or people at home. I'm not sure how this is being handled if it's being broadcast. But anyway, thank you for coming. On behalf of the Boiler Task Force, Boiler Replacement Task Force, Lisa Wolf, Eric Fowler, and Craig Tigerman, and myself. Mark Owen couldn't be here this morning. I want to thank everybody for their hard work so far. So the boiler replacement, it's one of those things, boilers get old and they need to be replaced. It's a problem that we knew we were going to have. The last time the boiler had major maintenance, they actually had to handcraft the replacement parts because they weren't available. So we were put on notice at that time that the boiler was nearing its end of life. So that's a known problem. So let's get started here. There we go. So just kind of a little signposting, roadmap here. We're just going to talk a little bit about what we currently have in terms of heating and cooling. We're going to give a little background on heat pumps, which is one of the options that we have for replacement. We're going to talk about what we see as our current options are. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we've been investigating and looking at in the 2.5 months or so that we've been working. So, first of all, the sanctuary boiler needs to be replaced. There's really not a question about that. And then we also have a separate boiler that provides heat for Koinonia Hall, the offices, the south and the east hallways. So those are separate systems. So one possibility is that we would try to consolidate those, or we need to be thinking about the future, in other words. Plus the preschool will need air conditioning eventually. They may not need it when they first move in, but there is currently no air conditioning in the south or the east hallways. So we have a number of priorities that we want to balance. One is that we want to be mindful of the cost, but we also have an opportunity to do something that's a little greener or sustainable. And so we want to take that into account too. So if we did something like geothermal, we might be able to save some money, and it would definitely reduce our carbon footprint. So those are the things that we've been thinking about. The other thing is we also have this sense of urgency because of the preschool moving in. So we have both this idea that we want to be thinking about the long-term future of the church and about the environmental issues at hand, but we also have this urgent need. So I just want to start out by giving you a little bit of a virtual tour of Grace's heating and cooling system. You can find this map, it's just posted outside here on the wall, but we've added some color shading to it. And we have multiple heating systems, kind of independent heating systems. So the sanctuary has its own boiler and air handler. The air handler just is the thing that moves in. It's the blower for the furnace, essentially. It's in this room. There's a door to the room that says authorized personnel only. It's unlocked. You can go in there and look if you want. But we have a picture of it here. So this is our boiler. It's been there for 46 years approximately. It was used when we put it in. So it's actually older than the sanctuary. And like I said, the last time it had major maintenance, they had to handcraft the parts because they're not available anymore.
Wow.
So we have known that it needs replacing eventually. One of the questions is, when we turn it off for the season, will it start again in the fall? So that's, again, another sense of urgency about this boiler. So the boiler just heats water. The hot water goes into this contraption, which is known as an air handler. It's essentially just the blowers. And we have trenches that run around the perimeter of the sanctuary, and the hot air comes up through the vents. Similarly, we have a couple of air conditioning units just outside the door on that corner of the building. And the air conditioners then, they have cooling coils that are placed inside these air handler units, and they provide cool air for the sanctuary. Again, all of this is just for the sanctuary. Okay, so we have a second boiler, and that boiler is in Koinonia Hall. There's a storage room where all of the tables and chairs go, and there's another little door in the back of the storage closet that says authorized personnel only. The door's not locked, you can go in there and look. And there's a boiler in that room, and also some pumps. And the hot water from that boiler goes up to the air handlers, which are in a second story space kind of above where the washing room is, the dishwashing room. So there's a little door between Koinonia Hall and the dishwashing room. I think it says authorized personnel only. It's not locked. And you can go up the very steep stairs into a room that has the air handlers. So here's the boiler. There are 3 air handlers up there. One air handler just handles the office space. One air handler, let's see, why are there 3? Well, one is for Koinonia Hall itself. And then a third air handler provides cool air for just the south hallway. Now the east hallway, there are actually pipes that run along the length of the hallway, and they go into a mechanical room in the far corner of the building where there's another air handler that just blows the warm air into the classrooms from the east side. So it's kind of a Frankenstein type of system. It would be really nice we do have some issues with the pipes that bring the hot water to the air handler for the east classrooms. Okay, so it's a little complicated, but again, it breaks down into these big zones. The new building has its own heating and cooling. No issues with that right now. So, I think I'm gonna hand it off.
Thanks, Brian. So again, Eric Fowler, he, him, his pronouns. I am married to your wonderful pastor, Reed Fowler. And also do a little bit of work on this in my day job is at Fresh Energy, which is a clean energy nonprofit, and we pay a lot of attention to the policy landscape supporting some of this. So some of these are things that we have been thinking about. I'll have a couple, full disclosure, there's some Fresh Energy. Full disclosure, there's some Fresh Energy material in here, so that's why I brought that in. So what is our current impact is one of the questions that we're thinking about. And the use of gas is really one of the key factors when we think about that impact. So the burning of gas is polluting in several ways. There's fine particulate matter, NO2, nitrogen dioxide, or you might hear nitrogen oxides, fine particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, and all of these, you just get from, you're burning something, right? And so you get that when you burn it. There are links to childhood asthma is particularly exacerbated, especially when it's at the stove and it's just kind of right there. It's not getting vented out of the basement. Yeah?
Is this too early for a question?
Depends what it is.
When burning, it's not complete combustion, so the byproducts are problematic.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when it's not complete, which it isn't always, then you get, so carbon dioxide is one of the other byproducts of burning, but also methane it leaks, so natural gas is methane. So when you have methane running through all these pipes underground and then, and then you burn it, but as you say, it's incomplete. When we leak methane into the air, that is 80 times better at warming the planet than carbon dioxide. 80 times. So carbon dioxide gets kind of the big name as the main greenhouse gas, and that's true, it's doing most of the warming, but methane is the second culprit. Okay, part of the impact of that, particularly from burning methane in our buildings, leads to a situation where buildings are responsible for between 30 and 40% of our emissions across the country. So contrast that to the electric grid, where in Minnesota we have a law now requiring our electricity to be carbon-free. And when I say carbon here, I mean, carbon, methane. We sometimes shorthand, net zero carbon emissions to mean net zero greenhouse gas emissions. So our electricity is going to be carbon-free by 2040. The natural gas system, on the other hand, is still growing. There's no way to use natural gas without methane and without these emissions. And so that's growing, and we're going to need to reverse that. We need to stop it growing and eventually start it shrinking. So here's a little context. This is, you can find this from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The Pollution Control Agency tracks our greenhouse gas emissions across different sectors. So here, this is maybe the starkest sector. I apologize, I'm sure it's hard to read, but electricity generation is right here. So this is between, and I didn't put the time scale in here. I believe that this is 2005 to 2020. So what do you see there? A precipitous drop in.
This is just 2019 to 2020.
These are the changes.
Oh, okay.
But the data goes back farther than that. So the emissions are already dropping precipitously from electricity. So when we evaluate using electricity instead of gas, this is part of the reason, because those emissions are plummeting, whereas our building emissions, I'm going to say they're still growing. It's going to require an asterisk. So here's what's happening. Residential emissions are still growing. Commercial emissions, on here it says that they're not still growing, but I believe that this 2020 data, what happened in 2020?
COVID.
Yeah, so is this data really reflective of whether or not our commercial emissions are dropping? I don't think that it is. I think that once the next set of data comes out, it's going to show that commercial buildings are also still increasing emissions in Minnesota. So that's some of the context that we're taking into consideration as we look at our three main options for what we might do with this HVAC, heating, ventilation, and cooling. So number one is going to be a like for like, where we just swap out. It would be a slightly more efficient new gas boiler, but we would do a very similar option, like for like. That's what's going to happen when you don't plan. So if we didn't have this committee, option number one would be the only option. So that's also an invitation in your personal lives if you're thinking about, maybe I would want to replace my water heater or my heating with something different. But if you don't make a plan, it can be really hard when your water heater dies and it's a gas water heater and you say, I need to be able to shower tomorrow, and then you end up with another gas water heater. So we're doing some planning to evaluate number 2 and 3 as other options, which both involve heat pumps. One would be an air source heat pump, and the other one would be a geothermal heat pump or a ground source heat pump. Okay, so what are heat pumps? Have you, raise your hand if you've heard of heat pumps before, you kind of know some of this. Okay, so we got an advanced audience here, that's awesome. So heat pumps are super efficient. It kind of breaks my brain that you can have something that is 300% efficient, right? That's kind of wild, but that's how the physics work. It's essentially a two-way air conditioner that can go in reverse and pull heat in during the winter instead of just scooping it out. A couple links here, you can go to Fresh Energy. Another resource to learn more is Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, which is specifically organizing faith communities around issues of climate and environment. Okay?
You're doing fine, you can keep going. He's doing fine, but just a couple of words about the advantages of heat pumps. And what got me interested in this task force was that I had installed geothermal in our home back in Rock Island, Illinois in 2005, and until we moved up here in 2014.
You should hold the mic a little closer.
Point it toward
Pick up on
you.
the-
Just point it toward your mouth.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway, we had a geothermal system in our home for 10 years, so we sold it and moved up here. It worked great, and we were able to replace our gas appliances that remained after the gas furnace and water heater were replaced by the geothermal system. The stove and the dryer, we bought electric and turned off our gas service. It was great, easy to maintain. How many of you are running a gas furnace right now in your home? Yeah, me too. So, we worry about carbon dioxide leaks and the pilot light, those kinds of things. They're not part of a geothermal system, so. But I want to talk about the air heat pumps and the geothermal, the ground source heat pumps, all in one slide here, because they're both all about moving heat instead of creating heat. And it's when you create heat that you have the byproducts that are warming our planet. So instead of that, it's just like Eric said, it's kind of like a two-way, it's what happens in your refrigerator, what's going on in those coils to get the cold in back in there and remove the heat that's building up in there. So that's basically how they work. Yeah. Any questions about that?
Yeah, there's a question.
Yeah.
A friend of mine installed a heat pump, but he told me that it's not efficient once it gets to a certain temperature, and then you sort of need an auxiliary unit. Is that still the case?
Let me tell you about what our system had, and also what I'm reading in articles lately. I've raised my eyebrows. Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, are taking these air heat pumps by storm. They love them. And certainly their climate is comparable to ours. And in those articles it says, well, if it gets below zero, you might need an auxiliary source of heat. That could be like a room heater or resistant electric heat. I don't know what other possible things. My geothermal system in Rock Island had the heat-resistant heat source built right into the unit, so that, as it was explained to me, if the temperature in your home was ever more than 2 degrees below what you want the system to provide, the heat-resistant heat automatically kicked in and supplemented that. And that never happened for us. So,
Is that a resistive unit?
yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of like a room heater where the little strip, you see it glowing all of a sudden, and it's, warm air. So that would be hopefully built into our system if we really needed a backup thing. Yeah, any other questions? Here's just a couple of quick diagrams so you can visualize it. Air source heat pumps move the cold air in the summer to air condition the home by moving the hot air back out. And in the winter, it's just the opposite. It moves the warm air in that it creates by compressing, what's that, Charles' Law or Boyle's Law or something? And moves the cold air out.
what is it?
Boyle's Law.
It is Boyle's Law.
Thank you, it's nice to have a physicist in.
What's Charles's Law?
Some guy named Charles, I'm not exactly.
Lee, you just lost all credibility.
Thank you. The geothermal or ground source heat pump is really the same, except that it's doing the heat exchange underground. Once you dig below about 5 feet, it's a constant temperature all year. Up here, they say it's around 50 degrees. Back in Rock Island, they told me it was 55, whatever, it's in the low 50s. And so the heat exchange can take place there, and then the decompressors and that kind of hardware takes moves the air through. It's a closed loop system. It's not open to the outside. There's no leakage or anything. And provides that heating or cooling, depending on season you're in. I love them. I'm all for it. This was where somebody was going to take that up.
So the easiest solution, the quickest solution is kind of a like for like. We talked with Jens Ryan, who does the maintenance on our current systems, and they made a proposal for a rooftop unit. The pros of a like for like solution is that it's the least amount of change. They would use the existing air handlers. It would be the fastest thing to install. It would probably be the lowest cost. But the arguments against it is that it's not only is least change a pro, it's also a con, because we're not getting any benefit, we're not making any improvements on sustainability. We might get something that's incrementally more efficient than what we currently have. But it's not going to be a game changer. It's going to use gas, so it's going to produce pollution. Minimally more efficient than the current system. It's going to have the largest carbon footprint of any of the solutions that we have. And it's going to lock us into a carbon burning solution for decades. I mean, the current boiler has lasted 45 years. We would be locked into this system again for another 40 years. So this is really a great opportunity for us to think about alternatives. The second option then is the air source heat pump. And again, it's a fairly small change to put in an air source heat pump. So it's not going to be terribly disruptive. They're very efficient. And we could cover 70 to 90% of our heating needs with air source heat pump. Again, the con is the question that was raised is that you might need a backup for the coldest days. And that backup could be either electric, which would be the best. It could also be another boiler, a backup boiler, which would not be the greatest, but it would be, might be something that we would consider. And finally, the third option is the geothermal option. So this is the most aspirational option that we would have. It would be a really big change to our system. We would be pulling out all of the, not only the boiler, but the air handlers. It would provide us with the lowest energy bill, so we would be using less energy, and we would eliminate our need for gas. So those are the really big arguments for it. Geothermal would not need a backup system the way that an air source or heat pump would. The arguments against it is that this is really a big change. It would be quite disruptive to be pulling out the current boiler system and putting in a geothermal system. In particular, you have to dig wells. So for the heat exchange. So we'll give an example. We went to Mount Olive Church in Minneapolis. They put in a geothermal system a decade ago. But we would probably have to dig dozens of wells, probably somewhere out in the parking lot, maybe on the maybe on the west side of the church, in order to do this.
Brian?
Yeah, and
Oh, excuse me. Oh, I lost my thought. Go ahead. Go ahead and put your thought. Sorry.
And all of this is predicated on whether or not it's feasible, because you have to be concerned about whether or not the geology of the site accommodates a geothermal system, because you have to have the conductivity from the geothermal, the fluid that's running through the pipes and the ground. And if your geology is not correct, if the conductivity isn't there, a geothermal system won't work. So in Apple Valley, we have some examples of geothermal systems. The municipal liquor store south of 42 has a geothermal heating system. So when the city built that municipal liquor store, their architects and their design engineers put in a geothermal system. Now, they also tried the Apple Valley Senior Center off Hayes Road. They considered geothermal, but the site didn't support it. So there's no geothermal system there. So we don't know. We're kind of midway in between those two places. We don't know right now whether or not geothermal is actually an option for us, but we can have a site well or a test well drilled to see whether or not it would actually be feasible.
Is it clay versus sand? What is it about the geology of the land that will determine that? And then for an expert like Eric, how often does that happen? And is Apple Valley likely to fall one way or another?
As I understand it, Apple Valley is built over about half a dozen quarries. They used to be there, and it's the rocks that just don't handle it. Back at our house, it's just good old soil, all the way down. That's the best, I guess.
I was gonna say, Uponor up on Johnny Cake is drilling right now for geothermal. They hit granite.
And they're across the road from a gravel pit.
Yeah. They weren't expecting that either, but, so.
Yeah, I have a friend who worked for the state in the geology division, and she said that Target is built on the largest gravel deposit in the state. So I don't know what we're gonna find here.
Maybe you still have questions, things to address here with your presentation, but my question is, how long would it take us to know that we are or are not on a feasible footprint for geothermal?
And how much?
Those are excellent questions. I think to drill a test well is just a matter of a couple of weeks. I mean, I don't think it takes long to do it. And we've gotten some different numbers on how much that would cost. But it depends on the type of geothermal system that you're doing. We talked to one company, it was Darcy, and they quoted something that was kind of out of our price range.
Very specialized.
But I think that there are other options for drilling.
Todd, can I put you on the spot?
Uh-oh. Yeah?
You had the assessment done at your house?
Oh, man. So we live over by Valley Natural Foods, and we had the assessment done at our house. We also do not qualify. Our ground composition is basically gravel, which is second to worst, he said, possible option, which I guess at this point really doesn't matter. But what they told us was that, well, first off, we didn't have to drill for it. They went based off of, because we're in a residential area, they went off of the original survey stuff, and they have details from the wells all the way back to when all these houses were built. And so they can get a really quick idea for the residential areas just based on the wells that they drilled originally when the houses were put up. But according to the person who did ours, who is a master geothermal technician in the state, he said that honestly, every place is different. So like, the idea that, well, it's gravel over here and the municipal liquor store, they could put one in, we could be something completely different right here, even though Target's sitting on the biggest gravel pit. So he said you just don't know until you either have the information from those original well surveys or you drill the well, because the ground changes very quickly in this area, so.
Define well.
Define
To
well.
me, it's water is what you're digging for when you create a well. But I know,
This is a well for
it's a
the.
terminology, I just want to know what the definition of how we're using the term well.
You're digging a hole.
Okay.
That's why.
Yeah, how
Well, I'll jump in here. It's a little hard to say and it depends on the approach. And I appreciate the question about how often does this happen. I'm not a practitioner. I focus a lot more on the policy. So unfortunately, in terms of doing a project, I don't have as much experience. In terms of the type of well, the type of, we call it a well because it is drilled by the
You're digging in
same
the ground,
people who are gonna drill a well for water, but it may not be as deep, it may just be in the soil. Or for the Darcy solution that we mentioned that had the rather astronomical cost, that is because Darcy is a Minnesota-based technology. They drill very, very deep into water rather than the soil or the earth layer. So you get a lot more heat transfer. So you could maybe get away with 5 wells instead of 12 wells. But they said it was gonna be $50,000 to drill the test well for Darcy. So that's an invitation for someone who has a $50,000 check they were waiting to write. If you wanna do that, great,
So
but.
a well is a source of energy.
Yes, it's a source of constant temperature that the heat pump can then pull heat out of or push heat into.
There has to be conductivity of the earth to transfer that heat.
Yes.
If you're taking heat from that, it's got to be a decent transfer of energy to the well source.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you say earlier that they knew what all, they were drilling wells in all these houses around here?
Well service.
Yeah, so they must be
No,
drilling.
we had city water in Apple Valley when they built the church.
Right.
Yeah, so people, it wasn't an older building where people had individual wells.
Most of Apple Valley is built on top of gravel.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole section across from Southview School was originally a gravel pit.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But the municipal liquor store, that was a gravel pit too, where that Target and all of that development was done.
Well, they had all this time to haul Apple Valley away.
So we'll have to see, we'll need to investigate. This is something that we haven't quite gotten to, where this is a work in progress, and we're giving you an update on where we are. So I think we're talking about something on the order of $10,000 for a test well, but we haven't really gotten there yet. So, but we'll get to that actually, we can talk a little bit more about where we are in the process.
Well, 10,000 has to be factored into the overall expense, I would think.
Well, yes, so I'll tell you right now that if we were gonna do a like for like, Jens Ryan quoted us,
$110,000 for the boiler?
yeah, actually closer, I thought it was closer to 200,000. No, I'm sorry, 100,000, a little over 100,000 just to replace the boiler with a rooftop unit, and $50,000 to put in air conditioning just on the east side. And then probably another 50 to get it on the south side. So we're talking at least $200,000. So it's not pocket change. Ron?
No, she had
Oh,
it
okay.
first.
Jeannie?
Could you get any information from building the building itself about what's underneath us? I mean, they had to do some studies to figure foundations and whatnot.
That's a good point. We'll write that down.
Along with everything else.
Actually, we've been talking with the architects who did the addition. The architects and the design engineers who designed the heating plant for this building.
Should we take one more question?
Yeah.
I think Ron.
Oh, okay.
Ron, did you have a question?
I just wanted to ask, if we're paying $10,000 for them to, and maybe I got that wrong, but to go with the GEO, and we're paying for them to see if they can find a well or if it would work, and they come back and they say, no, it's not gonna work. we're out of $10,000,
Yeah.
which could be applied, if you think, as I think about it, that $10,000, oh, well, we can't do it, sorry, bye, take your $10,000 and we're gone. Whereas that money could be put into probably another option. I mean, that's how I see it. Now, maybe
Right, so we may decide as a congregation that geothermal is a bridge too far for us. That it's just too expensive and it would take too much time. So we may not even choose to do the test well.
Okay.
So, but that's weird right now. We're just at a stage where we're looking at what are the options, what would the potential costs be, what are the upsides and downsides of all of each of those options.
I know you said just one more question, but if you're looking at, we've got the approximately $200,000 for the same. Do we have a general idea of the air source versus geothermal?
No, we don't have an idea
Okay.
yet. So we're still in the process of kind of getting the project underway and getting some engineering resources to look at that.
I mean, I would love geothermal. My
Yeah.
parents have it in their house. I think it's great, but
Yeah.
it may or may not be feasible here, so.
Well, and actually, this kind of, I'll make this point briefly here because this fits into, some of the recommendations that we're gonna get from an engineering design firm, which is going to be how to spend our money the most wisely. And sometimes that's gonna involve, and if you haven't worked with this or haven't thought about this before, maybe it seems weird, but actually, before we do anything to update the HVAC, there's a chance that they're gonna tell us some of your money is gonna go farther doing more insulation and more air sealing in the space, and that's gonna lower the demand on the system, which is gonna lower the permanent, the ongoing utility costs, and is also gonna mean that you can buy a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller equipment. And I would say if you're thinking about doing this at home, take note because the same process applies at home. If you're thinking about moving to a heat pump, you're gonna get the most bang for your buck by tightening up your building envelope, which is the overall barrier between the indoors and the outdoors. You might end up it being worth it to do that envelope work first and lower the demand.
So one of the things that we did was we went out and we looked around at other churches and other sites that might have systems that we might consider. So one of them is Mount Olive in Minneapolis. Now you've probably all heard of Mount Olivet.
Yeah.
This is Mount Olive, which is just south of Abbott Northwestern Church. It's on the corner of Chicago and 32nd or 31st. So it's kind of an inner city church. It was originally a Missouri Synod Church, but now they're ELCA. They made their switch in the 70s. So it's an interesting church. It was built roughly in 1930, and they had a boiler and they had radiators in their sanctuary. They didn't have air conditioning in their sanctuary, and they wanted it. So how do you get air conditioning into a church building? You need air vents. So this was a major change for their church because they had to take out the radiators and put in ventilation. So this was a huge project. So they took out their radiators, they put in ventilation, and as long as they were at it, they looked at geothermal. And that's the route that they went. So we took a tour. This is Art here in the middle. He's a retired pastor, and he was kind of the spearhead of their project, which they did in roughly 2014, 2012, sometime in the mid-teens. But they put in this geothermal system. They had a parking lot that was across 31st Street from the church. They drilled 48 wells in that parking lot. Okay. And so those wells are not particularly deep, but they needed enough of them to provide enough cooling or enough heating for their entire church. Again, sanctuary and social hall not the office buildings or the educational portions of the building.
Brian, when you
Yep.
say wells, how large a footprint would put in the parking lot each one?
I think they're like 2 feet in diameter. They're not huge, and then they have to be spaced roughly 10 feet apart.
And then you cover them all with, right?
And then they cover them over and they got a new parking lot. So, which they needed, but that's another issue. So we got a tour. These pipes contain ethylene glycol, is that right? So it's the solution that is in a closed system. It's being pumped under the street, over to their parking lot, into the wells. The water circulates. If in the summer it's hot water that is cooled by the ground and it comes back cooler, and then they extract heat from the air in the church. That heat goes into the ethylene glycol, it goes back out to the field. In the winter, it's reversed. The water comes in at 55 or 50 degrees. They extract the heat from it. Cold water goes back under the street into the well system where it gets warmed up. It was almost space age. It was really cool.
It looked like it.
There is an article on the Star Tribune. I think there's a link to it coming up, but you can read about it. Now, this was a huge project because of the fact that they had to put the ventilation in. We don't have that problem. So their project overall was 1.4 million. Now, we're not looking at anything that's going to be close to that. Just the geothermal wells, though, probably cost 300,000. So that's a wide range, but that kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. We're not talking about a $20,000 furnace. So
Are there government subsidies to help with all of
yes,
this?
there are lots of government subsidies, and because we are a nonprofit, it's actually referred to as direct pay. So we don't pay taxes, we don't get a tax credit, but they do actually offer to provide money back to us. There are also financing options where they give you a lower rate of interest if you need to borrow.
Thank you.
One more thing about Mount Olive is they decreased their utility costs from $32,000 per year to $28,000. So that doesn't seem like a big drop, but they got air conditioning too. So that's a big deal. Hand it off to you because I didn't go to the St. Joseph Church.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try to kind of speed through this a little bit here. So we toured another church. This was a quite a bit smaller project, but down in Maysville, south of Hastings. They have about a 20-year-old ground source system, about 12 wells. They were able to do this. They had a congregant who could drill the wells, so they were able to get free wells. So they,
Borrow that congregant?
You can become an associate member here.
that would be nice. So again, provides heating and cooling, minimal maintenance. They had some insulation. And then they figured that they saved about $500 a month because they also use off-peak electricity. So again, that's kind of in the mix of looking at all the different financing options. We are kind of exploring incentives and utility help, government help, etc. And then, okay, is that?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Next step.
So we've already talked with Wenzel. I'm sorry, I was saying Jen's right, but it's Wenzel who's our maintenance people. I talked to one of the administrators for the city of Apple Valley because he had been involved in some sustainability projects, and he said, well, why don't you just talk to CNH or architecture? Well, CNH was the people who designed this building, and so I talked to one of the architects at CNH, a guy named Quinn Hudson, and he said, well, you don't need architectural services, you need a design engineer. And he said, you should talk to EDI Delage. They did the heating and cooling for this building. They designed it, I should say, they didn't install it. And so we've contacted EDI. They are a local firm, they've done a lot of work. They did the work on the municipal liquor store. They've done some other projects, you can look at their website, it's pretty impressive. But all that they do, they don't install geothermal, they don't advocate any particular solution, they are kind of agnostic to different types of solutions. They simply evaluate what your needs are. And this is something that Mount Olive did. They had an architect because they needed an architect, but they also had a design firm that came in and designed the system, which is separate from the contractor that installs it. So the design firm determines what you need, how it should be done, or what should be done. The contractors come in and bid on the project, and they decide what is done. So we're going to separate the requirements from the actual work itself. So we're in those conversations right now. EDI is probably going to cost about $50,000 just to make a plan. So and we will probably need those kinds of services regardless of what our solution is.
Will they be able to break?
Unless we just go with Wenzel.
Will they be able to break it down and say, here's your installation costs, here will be your ongoing maintenance costs, here will be your ongoing use costs for the different systems that you're intending?
I'm hoping so.
Okay.
I mean, I think they have enough experience to do it. So. They've done a lot of projects around the Twin Cities, the schools, firehouses. They did the chalet at Highland Hills, some of these other projects.
I just have a question. The geo coming in, if we do geo, will it take over the whole building, or because you said that this part it has a different boiling system, will it take over the whole building? All of the buildings, I should say.
Well, that's another item that's up for discussion.
Or if it would be able, when they do the planning, plan it to hook up to it later,
right,
if the boiler goes out in the other building.
Right. Option number one would be just to replace the boiler for the sanctuary.
Right.
A bigger system, then if they consolidated the two boiler systems, then that would do everything except this building. Ideally, if we went with geothermal, we would want to think to the future, but I don't know what that would look like. Any other? Oh, let's see. So we have those ongoing discussions, and we still need to do some investigation of what kinds of subsidies and financing might be available to us.
Is the design company evaluating the air, I can't remember the name of it, not the geothermal, but the other, the second option?
The air source?
The air source too, are they doing all the options? Or just the geothermal?
We would like them to consider all of the options, but again, that's something, we'll have to, the discussions are just getting underway with that right now.
Work in progress.
And they'll give us numbers, so that all of this very expensive math, essentially, is what we would be asking for. We would be able to take those numbers and meet that demand with multiple different types of systems. So what they're gonna do is a calculation that will give us the BTUs needed, which is British thermal units. Don't ask me to say a whole lot more about those, but that's the measurement for how much load or demand you have in your building based on the climate, your building envelope, right? How quickly you're losing heat, stuff like that. And then we would just be able to say, oh, this is the BTUs we need. Well, we could get that many BTUs from an air source heat pump. We could get that many BTUs from a boiler. We could get it from a boiler as backup with an air source heat pump or ground source. That will give us the information to shop around.
Cost per BTU.
I don't know. Actually, the systems we're looking at are so big, they actually refer to them as tons.
Right.
So a BTU is the amount of energy to heat a pound of water 1 degree. A ton is a lot more. It's enough to heat a ton of water, 1 degree in 10 minutes, yes.
Celsius,
No, Fahrenheit.
both of them are Fahrenheit.
It's British thermal units, not metric.
Hey, Brian.
Our system is roughly 20. Our
Boyle's law.
Our current system is roughly 20 tons, so for what that's worth. It's just a number to beat.
Is there a target date by which time the decision must be made and we must be proceeding forward in order to get heat guaranteed in the fall when it gets cold?
I don't know, that's a question for church council. Ron,
The examples that you showed us of the different churches, were they, before they changed over, were they having the same issues that Grace is having with our boiler?
I don't know what drove, well, they wanted air conditioning. So it wasn't that the boiler was failing. And they do still have boilers. They put in new boilers for their administrative building, and their new boilers look like they take up about 1/4 of the space of our current boiler. So I'm assuming the boiler technology has advanced a lot since 1978.
Not knowing the cost of installation and other things like that, it seems that the preschool would be a real good candidate for one of those air heat exchangers to be able to heat and cool that room independently of what we might choose for other things.
Right, and there are in fact like room-sized heat exchangers that could be used for cooling those rooms. I'm not exactly sure how those are vented, but yeah, there are definitely options for them. And the south wing of the building over here, the south hallway, the heat comes from the koinonia boiler, and its air exchanger is up above koinonia hall. And there's room for an air conditioner on the roof there. So air conditioning for that wing is pretty easy to install. It's harder for the east wing because the air handler is in the corner, and putting the coils for the cooling into that air handler there are some space constraints. So, I think we're just going to wrap up here. If you have questions, you know the 4 of us, or 5, Mark's not here. Send an email if you have a follow-up question, and we're more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you guys so much.